Emery spent most of his marijuana seed profits on political efforts to prevent the incarceration of those who choose to use marijuana. But, less famously,
I even spent $250,000 of my own money from 2002 to 2004 on a fabulous drug addiction program that I personally administered here in the city called the Iboga Therapy House, where we treated hardcore heroin, crack, cocaine, and methamphetamine users to great success.
A BC clinic's tantalizing claim about a controversial drug called Iboga. A special report by Duncan McKeever.
The National.
Imagine a drug that promises to cure an addiction to crack cocaine, painkillers, even heroin, and often with just a single dose. That's the buzz these days around Iboga. But does it deliver on that promise? And is it safe? CBC's Duncan McHugh headed north of Vancouver to the only Canadian clinic offering Iboga therapy.
This man, Marc Emery, is offering to cure addicts. He isn't a doctor or an addiction specialist. He's a businessman who in the past 6 months has become a self-styled healer, dispensing a little-known drug called Iboga. He established an experimental clinic he calls the Iboga Therapy House. Here on the Sunshine Coast, Emery has treated 24 addicts so far. The average treatment lasts up to 4 days. Emery says some need 2 or 3 doses to break hardcore addictions, but he claims most are now clean. Each treatment costs Emery about $2,000. He provides it free. Generosity made possible by a controversial enterprise that's made him rich. Emery sells marijuana seeds on the internet.
We do $3 million in seed sales a year, and that's how we pay for the Iboga Therapy House, which will run to about 60 to 80 grand a year.
addicts came to Emery, and with as little as one treatment, he cleansed them of their addictions. To some, it seemed like a miracle.
She's convinced Iboga has worked.
I think it's a miracle. I do. That's what I was like in some kind of euphoric state yesterday because I realized that it really had worked and it was like a miracle.
In early 2002, having resumed business at his old location and flush with cash from his seed-selling business, Emery was ready to fulfill a promise that he had made after the second raid of Hemp BC.
We're civilized people, so we can't dig up violent means, we have to dig up peaceful means. And that means participating in the democratic process, such as it is, and getting out and saying our piece.
Are we going to keep smoking marijuana? Yeah! Are we going to keep growing marijuana? Yeah! That's right, we are. We're going to keep doing it because we love marijuana. You know, in the 1930s, there was a country in Europe that started identifying people. They started a pogrom, it's called, against a certain group of people. And the first thing is identification. And the second thing is segregation. And the third thing is concentration. And the fourth thing is extermination. And those things happen in cultures around the world where a band of evil settles on a country and there's no one left to defend it. Well, think about it. What happens when we get arrested? We get identified. We get fingerprinted. We get strip searched, which I believe is sexual assault. Anybody who fondles your body parts looking for substances that will do you no harm or anyone else is a pervert, a menace to society, and they usually wear blue uniforms in my experience. And then there's segregation. Then we're not allowed to work with others. Then we're not allowed to organize in groups without a lot of cops nearby. Then we can't have our own publications. You know, all literature about marijuana is still technically illegal under 462.2 of the Criminal Code. That's step 2. And then there's concentration. The hundreds of thousands of people in United States and Canadian prisons over marijuana. That's concentration. It's not just the right to smoke pot. It's the right to us to have the state off our backs. The state, the government, and the people who are in this building who represent that point of view are evil. They are out for our extermination and our elimination and our segregation, and you have to do everything in your power to stop that. And that means using all the peaceful democratic means at our disposal. That means writing letters, that means getting involved in protests, it means voting. And on that note, I'm running for mayor of Vancouver. This would be my first official announcement, but hopefully, if the Vancouver Sun doesn't object too much, there's a full-page ad in the Vancouver Sun tomorrow and a double-page ad in the Vancouver province where I outline that there's been a lot of police malfeasance, corruption, and just plain rotten behavior towards the cannabis community and the Vancouver community in general in the last 9 years since Philip Owen was mayor. It's an appalling legacy Philip Owen has left us. He talks about 4 pillars I see one pillar, enforcement. I don't see any treatment. I don't see harm reduction. I don't see any tolerance. All I see is cops, cops, and more cops. Thanks very much.
In fact, on the election campaign trail, it was all cops, cops, cops too.
In fact, my opponents are 2 ex-cops, and then the other third party is made up of the party that actually solicited several hundred police officers to join the party and show up in uniform at its nomination meeting. So I'm up against some fairly tyrannical opposition here in the local election.
Ladies and gentlemen, in 1973, I worked Hastings Street as what was then called street crew. I was a drug squad officer.
I've already told you that I feel that there needs to be more enforcement, more visible police in this community, and to go after the drug dealers. Absolutely.
But ironic that the 2 candidates on my side are both ex-police officers, because you're hearing a police officer's explanation of things. We have more enforcement will solve the problem. Because enforcement won't solve the problem. The more you enforce, the more the money is good. The profits go up because the people still want the drugs. That is why nothing good will change if the business community's police officer gets elected, or the Marxist community's police officer gets elected, or Jennifer Clark and Vern Campbell, the extreme right-wing police officers party gets elected. It will be the same if you vote for these people. If you want to see a real radical change, you will have to consider what I am telling you. We will have to legalize these drugs.
It was to be a campaign that was sure to provoke the Vancouver Police Department.
They're the worst cops, I assure you, in all of Canada. The fact that there's 20 of them here now in a library sitting around doing nothing, I'm not sure that many can even read, is a complete waste of your tax dollars. But nonetheless, they are here. The police are leaders in the fight to keep prohibition. It's the war on drugs that provides so much crime in this community. People stealing, people prostituting, people losing lives, getting HIV and hepatitis C. Because they are drug addicts. The police department is the biggest group of people fighting to keep the drug war going. And by the way, as mayor candidate for Vancouver, I will make sure that I squeeze the nuts of that chief of police of Vancouver. They should never be allowed to comment on a political issue. They should shut up and do their job. Vancouver, by the way, has the worst police department in all of Canada. They solve fewer than 1 in 5 crimes. The only thing they're good at is busting grow-ups. And you can bet that I'm buying full-page ads to remind the people of Vancouver they have the worst police department in Canada, with the worst attitude and the worst success in solving basic ways to protect our community, to make our community safe. Vancouver Police Department has consistently failed in that department for the last 10 years and is almost always the worst police department in Canada. And these people have the arrogance to say that they believe that marijuana use should continue to be punished, that they somehow are a higher moral body than we are of ourselves. And let me tell you, the police in this town are dirty. I will reveal scandal in this campaign. I will reveal how inefficient they are in campaign, and just how plain mean-spirited and evil.
It seems reasonable to expect that the Vancouver police force was embarrassed and livid over Emery's fiery condemnations and taunts, but he was saving his best for last, and so were the police. In March of 2000, Time magazine reported that BC marijuana grown from Emery seeds was overwhelming DEA and border crossing officials in the United States.
We have a huge regional, national, and international issue here in the growing of marijuana in lower British Columbia. That's a major problem for us. His activities are kind of at the leading edge of that marijuana problem.
We've been able to spread about $4 billion worth of pot around North America, which has at the very least kept hundreds of thousands of police officers busy day in and day out.
Last year, the United Nations cited Marc Emery as their nemesis in the war against drugs.
The UN began to point the finger at Canada and its failure to do anything about Marc Emery.
One of the things that Barbara Amiel once said long, long ago is that it's a good thing Gandhi was in British India, I'll tell you, instead of like Portuguese Angola or Spanish Mozambique, because they'd have just killed him in those countries. You don't lead protests, you're a dead man. And the great thing about being in Canada is being friendly fascism is that you can do what I can do. And I've even had, the last time I got convicted, which must have been my 23rd count. I've been convicted of everything, but and I've never won in court, by the way. I've been convicted of every single charge. So there's 23 different counts I've been convicted of in 3.5 years and lost all this money. And I can still say I am so glad to be a Canadian because I've never even been put on probation. what I do with undoubtedly, in fact, I could get the death penalty if I did this in the United States.
You import a commercial quantity of drugs in the United States for the purpose of destroying our children, we will kill you.
But if I were to try and get away with doing it, I've had over 250,000 seeds seized on these various times too. 250,000 seeds. Well, in the United States, each seed represents a plant, and over 60,000 seeds or plants, the death penalty. You become a drug kingpin at that point. So you become and a drug kingpin. And yet, the last time I got convicted, a judge gave a nice speech on my behalf, saying that if everybody we have a particularly bad skid row called Hastings and Main in Vancouver, and he said it, and the courthouse is right there, which is a very strange irony, and. He said that if everybody were smoking what Mr. Emery smokes, I can't see this community being any different from Whistler, as it turns out he mentioned, or any other community in Canada. He said, I don't think marijuana is harmful, but since the law is the law, and he fined me, I think, $2,000, which I get in the mail in about an hour. You know?
In the summer of 2000, Ontario's Court of Appeal gave the Canadian government 1 year to create a medical use exemption in its ban on small amounts of marijuana. In response, the Canadian government brought in regulations to facilitate the medical use of marijuana. Meanwhile, committees in the House of Commons and in the Senate were holding hearings on the non-medicinal use of drugs. In July of 2002, Canada's Justice Minister, Martin Cochon, suggested that Ottawa would consider decriminalizing the possession of small amounts of marijuana. And, in September of 2002, 2 months prior to the end of the mayoral campaign in Vancouver, this happened.
Good evening. The long debate over how to deal with marijuana in this country has taken a new course. Today, a Senate committee has recommended Canada legalize it.
Studies show marijuana is less harmful than alcohol, that it does not lead to harder drugs, and that the laws don't stop people from smoking it anyway. So, it recommends regulating the sale of pot. Trafficking would stay illegal, shutting out criminals. Instead, licensed retailers. Anyone over 16 could buy it. As for those with criminal records for possession now, amnesty for everyone.
Hello, Pot TV viewers around the world. Today in Canada is a momentous day, and I'd like to be able to tell you...
At 1 o'clock this afternoon, Marc Emery addressed the world. For a momentous occasion, he called, the special subcommittee of the Senate has decided that marijuana should be legalized. This is a big day for Vancouver's mayoral candidate.
Hello, Pot TV viewers around the world. Today in Canada is a momentous day, and I'd like to be able to tell you that without reservation, it's the most significant development in the history of the battle against cannabis prohibition in Canada. The report is extraordinarily intelligent and far-reaching, and they have unanimously endorsed our #1 demand from the cannabis culture that we have all aspects of marijuana cultivation, sale, and use legalized. And furthermore, the Senate says all cannabis users in Canada who have criminal records as a result of any aspect of cannabis should have those records expunged. And that is the second of 5 demands that our movement has always made. And this in itself is tantamount to an apology. It basically concedes there's never been a legitimate health, moral, or socio-economic or criminal reason to arrest us. How can decades of this policy be justified now in the absence of a moral reason, a health reason, and economic reason? The only reason that is left is that our Canadian government is willing to sacrifice the sick, the dying, the marginalized, the poor, young people, people who are vulnerable in our society. They are willing to sacrifice those people in order to pursue a trade policy with the United States.
Emery was right on the money. Sacrificing cannabis-using Canadians would be the price of maintaining trade with the USA, and some were willing to pay it.
We don't want to restrict the free flow of commerce more than is absolutely necessary.
But John Walter says the U.S. is being left with no choice but to crack down at the border because of the Canadian government's attitude.
When you relax the penalties, when you act as if you're more tolerant in acceptance of drug use, you get more drug use. It's just you can't sell the opposite to that anymore. And if you try to pretend that you're going to do that, I think you have to be seriously engaged in self-delusion.
The opposition leader fears the U.S. won't buy it.
This is a bad time to introduce a piece of legislation that clearly will be another irritant in Canadian-American relations. I do think all of this raises concerns about, or should raise concerns once again about the need to reform the Senate, the need to have a legislative body that is elected and accountable and acts that way. And I think if we had that, it would have tempered some of the recommendations in this report.
Their report has no legal teeth, but it comes just as a Commons committee is studying the same thing. Its report is due in November. The cabinet minister, who will have a big say in the final decision, has already said decriminalizing might be better than legalizing, but
certainly the government is open-minded in doing something on that side. Are we ready to go as far? We'll see.
In November of 2002, before the Commons Committee could issue its report, President George W. Bush's drug czar, John Walters, came up to Canada's cannabis capital, Vancouver.
This is Mecca. This is our version of Mecca. This is where people pilgrimage to from all over the world to come here to absorb the aura of the world that they see as the future for them. The world they'd like to see. The world where marijuana seems to be legal and people are handing it around and joyfully celebrating it without any fear, without being hunted, without, this is always a sanctuary. We're a combination of church and pilgrimage site all rolled into one because people feel safe here. They feel safe around me. If I'm not afraid, the idea is they shouldn't be afraid either.
It's not long to go. We actually will have success. I can see it. I can taste it. Change is happening. Time magazine is talking to me tomorrow and they said, we want to talk about what's going on in Canada, how it is impacting on the whole world. The Times of India is doing an article about what we do in Vancouver is changing the way Asia looks at marijuana prohibition. Everybody is looking at us.
I am equally as excited about being over in Vancouver. The most exciting political stuff I see going on in the entire world is going on in Canada, and the epicenter of all that seems to be Marc Emery.
Vancouver, in the guise of kind of progressive opinion, is victimizing increasing numbers of young people and being a staging area for increasing victimization of people not only in Canada but in the United States.
In Vancouver, Walters would give a speech hosted by the Board of Trade. The speech was given just blocks away from Emery's cannabis culture headquarters at the Vancouver Sheraton, just opposite the provincial courthouse.
U.S. Drug Czar John Walters was in Vancouver to speak to the Vancouver Board of Trade. This is a man who is known to be critical of Canada's so-called soft position on drugs and opposed to drug reforms in general. Such reforms are very much in the plans for Vancouver, so when Vancouver's outgoing and incoming mayors heard about his visit, they weren't amused.
6 of the tables were occupied by local police officers who received Walters warmly. But Emery had bought a table also, and he and his 9 guests heckled Walters mercilessly.
The American drug czar told guests at a Vancouver Board of Trade luncheon that Canada and the U.S. must work together to combat the use and trafficking of illegal drugs.
The drug consumer in the United States is the single biggest funder of anti-democratic forces.
We all know democracy's piece of shit, in my opinion. Nothing good has come from democracy. No great change ever occurred because some politician wanted it to. Fuck this democracy. Get out, break those goddamn laws. People send me a fantastic amount of money, unbelievable amount. In fact, they send me about $1.5 to $2 million just to me personally every year. Now that's a lot of money. If I give it away to a whole bunch of other people and they cause lots of shit and subversion, it'll be like 100 of me out there. Little Marc Emery clones with this money, I will destroy this state, and stuff like that, right? So
the drug consumer in the United States is the single biggest funder of anti-democratic forces on the right and left in this hemisphere.
Not everyone agreed with today's tough message coming from the U.S. White House.
Of the 6 million people who could benefit from treatment and need it in the United States today, 60% are dependent on marijuana.
There's 3 million of us here who smoke pot and none of us need treatment.
In the last 2 years, for the first time, we had more teenagers seeking treatment for marijuana dependency than for alcohol, which never used to be the case because of the greater availability of alcohol.
But Emery and his guests weren't just trying to embarrass the drug czar. Even the then mayor of Vancouver agreed with them that the drug czar was misrepresenting the facts.
They arrested and charged 40,000 people in New York City for marijuana offenses. Those people then went, a lot of them, to a drug court. And the drug court says, well, we can try and save you from a record. We won't put you in jail, but we'll put you into treatment. So they're into treatment. So therefore you're saying, the translation, you can extrapolate from that the fact that the marijuana users are the ones that are in treatment. Well, they're in treatment because of the structure.
Being called out on his misleading statements, Walters was humiliated and incensed.
I am a public official. I am subject to scrutiny of the press, of the Congress, of officials at various levels. What I say, what I write, what I'm responsible for can be questioned and debated. I never heard of you.
And there were 2 tables of cops that were furious at us.
Oh, yeah.
Told us to shut up.
The Drug Czar doesn't like me at all.
No, he was here at the Board of Trade, and I believe you bought a table.
Oh, I bought it right in front of him. Yeah, I have a nice photograph of him just moments before. I'm saying, Mr. Walter, can I get a photograph with you? And he says, well, who are you? I'm Marc Emery, publisher of Cannabis Culture magazine. I never saw a person turn so beet red so quickly and looked like they'd seen the devil incarnate.
The following day, the Vancouver police took Walters to Emery's pot block to see the paraphernalia being sold at the BC Marijuana Party headquarters and to see pot being smoked freely at the New Amsterdam Cafe next door.
It's 5 minutes to closing. The Drug Czar comes in, surrounded by the Secret Service guys, and I mean surrounded, literally. Their backs to him in a circle around him, watching everybody else with the little dangly things coming off of their ears.
And he was accompanied by a Canadian police officer, I hear?
Yes. Kashid of the Vancouver Police Department is the head of the odd squad, the drug squad. And we were smoking some fabulous hash right here, sitting right here. And John Walters came by. Steve Tuck blew a cloud of this fabulous hash right at Steve Walters.
John Walters.
John Walters.
Nice.
We may be the only ones in history to have ever smoked a bowl right next to the Drug Czar and not get beat down.
With a cloud of hash smoke puffed into his face, his host from the Vancouver police force looking on, Walters had Emery and Emery's Vancouver pot block in his sights. Having known of Emery's multi-million-dollar seed-selling business for approximately 8 years, the Vancouver police suddenly decided to investigate Emery's seed-selling business. But while the Vancouver police were conducting their investigation, the Canadian legal and political landscape continued to change rapidly. In January of 2003, a lower court judge in Ontario declared that Canada's law against the possession of small amounts of marijuana had been struck down by the Court of Appeal decision made in 2000 because the federal government had failed to create a medical use exemption in its marijuana prohibition law, as it had been told to by the court in 2000. The Prime Minister of Canada swooped in with the proposal of brand new legislation to prohibit the non-medicinal use of cannabis.
We will soon introduce legislation to decriminalize possession of small amounts of marijuana. Don't start to smoke right away. We're not legalizing it. We're decriminalizing it.
Before introducing the bill in the Parliament, Canada's Liberal Justice Minister, Martin Cochon, first met with U.S. Attorney General John Ashcroft to discuss the particulars of the legislation that Cochon was about to introduce. Members of the House of Commons were outraged.
In Ottawa, the opposition asked why an American politician saw the bill before it was tabled in Canada.
I've been around long enough to have respect for Parliament and know that laws should be put down here first and not elsewhere. The Prime Minister, even though he's been here longer than me, never has to worry about being charged with possession of respect for Parliament, even in small amounts.
The White House responded to developments in Canada's marijuana laws with nothing short of hysteria.
More use in Canada, he says, will mean more smuggling to the U.S., and that, he says,
is a form of harm that amounts to a kind of chemical warfare.
While Justice Minister Cochon was in the United States, Superior Court Justice Stephen Rogan was busy writing a decision in which he would dismiss the Crown's appeal and confirm the lower court finding that Canada had no law prohibiting the possession of 30 grams or less of marijuana. In reality, the Liberal decriminalization bill was an attempt to reintroduce prohibition by means of the institution of steep fines instead of imprisonment.
The new proposed federal recriminalization laws, they're not reforms, there's nothing reform in them, they're all backwards. More punishment for growers, more punishment for smokers, certainly with what we have now, which is a complete legality of possession in Ontario, right? What the government is proposing is a terrible step backwards.
So Emery, not wanting to lose the ground that had been gained in the courts, held a demonstration outside of Toronto Police headquarters to bring the public's attention to the fact that in Ontario, the possession of 30 grams or less of marijuana was no longer prohibited.
Over 160 million people on this planet smoke marijuana, and over 500,000 at any one time are in jail. As we shall demonstrate, I hope, with the cooperation of law-abiding police departments everywhere in Ontario, under a Superior Court decision by Stephen Rogan on May 16th, you are authorized to possess marijuana anywhere in the jurisdiction of Ontario. And it is permissible under law to smoke marijuana anywhere where it is permissible to smoke tobacco in Ontario. You may have cannabis clubs and organize and associate with marijuana free from police or government interference for about 5 more months at the very minimum. At that point in time, the federal government could recriminalize marijuana, or the Court of Appeal decision could come out as late as November. But for 5 months, and especially this summer, Ontario is the freest jurisdiction in the Western world. 3 cheers for Superior Court Justice Stephen Rogan. Hip hip hooray! Hip hip hooray! Hip hip hooray! And to our freedom! Every bit of legislation proposed by the federal government is a recriminalization. You must oppose it. When Parliament reconvenes this fall, there will be pressure from the troglodytes and dinosaurs and all the parties to make the law punitive again so that we go to jail.
And actually, the reason I'm there in Toronto is because I'm speaking to a group of famous Canadians the day before is what it gets down to, a thing called Idea City.
Do you hope to see a lot of marijuana smoking at Idea City?
I brought about half a pound with me, so there's enough to survive all the parties. I think they enjoy the fact that we do entertain some of their guests with our fine BC produce.
I'm a judge here in Ontario in a judgment upheld by even more senior court throughout the existing law as being unconstitutional against the spirit of the Charter of Rights. So we're in a peculiar never-never land. Nonetheless, in various other parts of the country, prosecutions continue, and last time Marc Emery appeared here, he mesmerized us all by reminding us that something like 650,000 or 700,000 Canadians have criminal records for the possession of minor amounts of marijuana, and what that then does to their lives. The rate of prosecution continues at somewhere around 20,000 prosecutions a year. Different jurisdictions apply the law in different ways. So I don't get it, and I'm hoping that Marc Emery, who's made a very courageous lifetime of advocating against the current situation, can come up and explain it to us. Marc's been raided 10 times. He's been arrested 8 times. He's gone to jail 4 times. Nonetheless, he and his amazing assistant, Michelle Rainey, who's also in the audience here, keep up the good fight. Thank you.
The Toronto event was remarkable. The number of people who showed up was so significant and important, it justified and gave credibility to the worldwide media that covered us. I mean, we were in every Canadian newspaper, except the Vancouver ones, which is strange. I guess they've had enough of me. But we were in London Free Press, Kitchener-Waterloo Record, the Toronto Star, the Metro News in Toronto. We were on the National Post. We were on every major TV station. We were on the national news that night, CNN. We were carried in Reuters, and we've been broadcast in radio stations in France, in Sweden, in Ireland, in Great Britain, all telling people marijuana is legal in Ontario. Come and visit.
Uncertainty over the status of the law led to decisions in other provinces of Canada in which judges threw out charges because it was not clear that there was any law prohibiting the possession of personal amounts of marijuana.
And it occurred to me, I should go on a cross-Canada tour. The Summer of Legalization 2003 Prince of Pot Tour. Why should Ontario get all the breaks? Let's have people visit anywhere in Canada and feel that they can smoke marijuana without getting their pot taken away, without getting charged. So here's what's happening. I am going to come to a community near you, or if you want me to come to your community and you could raise enough people to show up at your local police headquarters. I've got Saskatoon for Saskatchewan, Calgary for Alberta, Prince George for BC, Winnipeg and Dauphin for Manitoba, Sault Ste. Marie for another Ontario place, though that's kind of like an easy one since we know they can't charge us, but I don't know, Northern Ontario might be a bit different, so we've got to push it there too. Moncton, Halifax and St. John's.
But, I mean, they are obviously breaking the law. They're blatantly breaking the law. If they get the law changed by doing this, then where's the end in sight? I mean, the lobby that wants to legalize marijuana might go and smoke dope on the Parliament steps.
And after Parliament reconvenes, I want to be in Ottawa and we'll smoke out in front of Parliament. It's definitely legal in Ontario. But whether other provinces honor that, we're going to find out.
Beginning in Winnipeg, Manitoba, he, with a group of supporters, would smoke marijuana in front of police stations in the major towns or cities of Canada's provinces. In some cities, the police looked on passively.
The law says we can't do anything, and that's where it's at.
In other cities, he was detained or even charged. But on September 25, 2003, Emery led hundreds in a smoke-in on Parliament Hill.
You know, I've been at this for 14 years, and I am truly proud to say I can stand on Parliament Hill and say I'm holding a legal joint.
That's right.
I love this country. I love the people. I fear my government, of course. But I want to tell you, I am as proud as I have been in 18 cities to tell people that I am Canadian.
Days later, on October 7, 2003, Ontario's Court of Appeal dismissed the Crown's appeal of the January 3, 2003 decision that had found Canada to have no law prohibiting the possession of 30 grams or less of marijuana. All charges against Emery were dropped. However, on that same day, the Court of Appeal in another case amended the federal regulations concerning access to medical marijuana in order to make those regulations comply with the Constitution. By doing so, it effectively reimposed Canada's prohibition of the non-medicinal possession or cultivation of marijuana. Emery was furious.
Hi there, I'm back, because I'm pissed, actually. And you know, the summer of legalization, I'm not going to have wasted all that tour for nothing. We're going to make that the winter of our discontent. And actually, I've looked at this decision. This is what the Ontario Court of Appeal decision is bad, terrible, all over. The government tonight is drinking champagne and celebrating. They probably called strippers and they're having a great old time. They got everything they wanted on a silver platter from the Ontario Court of Appeal.
When the Vancouver police brought their Emery file to the Crown prosecutor in July of 2003, the prosecutor declined to have Emery charged. The Vancouver Police Department had spent months in an expensive and time-consuming investigation of Emery's seed business, but the Crown was showing the Vancouver police the exit door. With the help of the Canadian Charter, the law was catching up to Canadian culture, a culture much less religious than that of John Walters and his social conservative supporters in the USA. Not only had the wall fallen on Canada's marijuana possession laws, but Canada had also begun to recognize marriages of gay and lesbian couples. Along with the American government, some Americans, especially those comprising the religious right, responded with disbelief and with outrage towards Canada.
Canada, oh Canada, land of the free and immoral. Their left-wing political annex now paving the way for cannabis tokers to pop it, pass it, and possess it. What will this do for us in the States, and how does it affect our homeland security efforts? Free Canada! Free Canada! Same-sex marriage, now to be recognized in our neighboring Canada, the impact it will have on Americans crossing the border to tie the knot. Their continuing downward spiral of immorality is affecting what decency, neighborly manners, and morality we have left, making them more foe than any friend I'd care to have.
Emery had made himself the de facto poster child for the Canadian assault on the values of a much more religious USA.
What do American youth think? They say they're going to tell their friends to come over to Canada and light up. Would you have any problem walking up and down Olette Avenue in front of the bars, lighting up a joint?
Oh, we'll probably be doing it later on tonight.
As soon as we came downtown, we got out of the taxi, and some kid came up to us and said, "Hey, are you American?" We said, "Yeah," and he said, "Do you want some marijuana?" That was like the first person we met.
Here's the marijuana!
Puffing smoke on the steps of police stations across Canada, Emery's well-attended demonstrations were received by some police as a collective screw you, and undoubtedly it was an embarrassment for the Canadian police, who had been kissing up to their American counterparts.
Oh, say can you see by the dawn's early light.
And in October of 2003, as the Ontario Court of Appeal was reinstituting marijuana prohibition, a frustrated Vancouver police force handed its Emery file over to American authorities, including the DEA.
The police department in Vancouver investigated well over 2 years ago Mr. Emery, provided information to Crown Counsel to support charges. Crown Counsel refused to take those charges. The DEA picked up on that information and initiated their own investigation.